But what concerns me the most is the next generation forgetting who we are as a people. We're a unique country. We're a miraculous country. We're the first country ever in recorded history to have a constitution that empowers the individual and not government. But what scares me and concerns me, according to polling, only about a third of young people are even somewhat proud to be an American. A free society, we can't remain free if an entire generation of young people don't understand what's so unique and what makes us free.
By one count, the United States has interfered in more than 80 foreign elections between 1946 and 2000. And that doesn't count U.S.-backed coups and invasions. Former CIA Director James Woolsey recently joked about the U.S. record of meddling overseas during an interview with Laura Ingraham on Fox News.
Have we ever tried to meddle in other countries' elections?
Oh, probably, but it was for the good of the system in order to avoid the communists from taking over. For example, in Europe, in 47, 48, 49, the Greeks and the Italians, we
don't do that now, though. We don't mess around in other people's elections, Jim.
What the fuck does that mean?
Only for a very good cause.
Can you do that? Do a Vine video on a former CIA director.
Only for a very good cause in the interests of democracy.
The list of countries where the U.S. has interfered is long. In 1893, the U.S. helped overthrow the Kingdom of Hawaii. 5 years later, in 1898, the U.S. invaded and occupied Cuba and Puerto Rico. A year later, it was the Philippines. Early 20th century interventions included Nicaragua, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, all in the 1910s.
In 1953, the U.S. helped overthrow the Iranian government. A year later, in 1954, the U.S.-backed coup in Guatemala, overthrowing the democratically elected leader of Guatemala, Jacobo Arbenz. Then in the 60s, the list grew to include, once again, the Dominican Republic, Indonesia, and the Congo. And that's just a partial list.
Lenny Carvel, him, her, him, bodies!
Even with the end of the Cold War, U.S. interference overseas did not end. Next week marks the 15th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Iraq to topple the government of Saddam Hussein.
I say all the time that as Americans, we should never forget every morning when we wake up, we won life's lottery. But being able to be born and breathe the air as a free American. And that millions of people on this planet would do everything in their power to swap places with us. They'd crawl over broken glass. They would cling to the side of an airplane just for the chance to be an American. But right now, in a lot of our schools, our kids aren't being taught how unique we are as a country.
If you look on a timeline, the history of the United States is still fairly brief, and slavery was abolished a mere 155 years ago. It wasn't just the White House that was built using slave labor, by the way. The building that serves as our country's political center, the United States Capitol, was built and rebuilt using slave labor after its sacking in the War of 1812. Although most northern states had abolished slavery by 1804, it's had its fair share of symbols erected using slave labor. If you're familiar with the Trinity Church in New York's financial district, you may not know that the clergy rented enslaved people to build its iconic spires. Thomas Jefferson's entire property in Charlottesville, Virginia, Monticello, was built and run by enslaved people. Enslaved people also helped build our intellectual centers. Georgetown University, one of the country's oldest colleges, built most of its campuses after the sale of 272 enslaved people in the 1830s. Many schools with storied histories were built in part by enslaved people, including Harvard University's Law School and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. That school's campus was maintained by slave labor until its abolishment in 1865.
This country's financial center, we built that too. Wall Street earned its name because enslaved Africans built a wall to protect Dutch settlers from raids in 1653. This wall ran from river to river. Slaves built the roads, the docks, and most of the big-time buildings in the area that would soon become New York City. And railroads, slaves did that. North America's 4 major rail networks all own lines that were built and operated with slave labor. Before the Civil War, nearly every rail line east of the Mississippi River and south of the Mason-Dixon line was constructed or run at least partly by slaves. You know what else we built? What about that great American music genre? Yes, rock and roll. We built that too. And blues, and jazz, and hip-hop, and pop. Clearly, there isn't enough time to go through all the ways black people have built this country. They're vast.
Margaret Thatcher once said, you know what? In Europe, all the countries emerge out of history. America is the first country to ever emerge out of a philosophy. Or as G.K. Chesterton noted, America is the first country in the history of the world to ever be founded on a creed. Well, what's that creed? I think the American that best captured it was Dr. Martin Luther King on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, where he talked about those inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Dr. King called that the promissory note made to every American, past, present, and future.
I think most Americans believe that after you commit a crime and pay your debt to society, the punishment ends. You have the chance to rebuild your life and get a fresh start, but the reality is much harsher. We punish people with criminal records long after they've paid their debt to society, and we all suffer for it. Even simply being accused of a crime is just the beginning of perpetual punishment. A cycle of legalized discrimination, poverty, and reincarceration, a cycle kept in motion by 47,000 laws and regulations nationwide that restrict critical rights and opportunities. After contact with the criminal justice system, millions of Americans are denied employment and housing, denied college educations, excluded from public benefits, separated from their children, deported despite being legal residents, and deprived of the right to vote. These restrictions trap the poor and people of color in invisible cages that extend far beyond prison walls and criminal courts. Cages that lead to a lifetime of obstacles that undermine even the most earnest efforts at rehabilitation and redemption. Cages that send the message, you will never be a part of society again.
And never forget, we are fundamentally a good, decent, and noble people. America is the only country, the only one, in which our national anthem actually ends with a question. Are we still the land of the free and the home of the brave?
No.
My passionate belief, my goal, is to make sure that the next generation understands that we are unique, that we are the American miracle.
Yep, I'm turning this shit off.